Perfect. Okay, great. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so survivors' access to work, paid family medical leave program. We're going to get into all the details around self-attestation, confidentiality, and some pending federal legislation as well. Sierra, can you advance to the next slide, please? And okay, I'm not seeing those slides either, so maybe this is. Okay, are you seeing the slide that has why do we need this?
Yes.
Okay,
are you
great.
able to see my slides?
I can see your slides. Yes, okay, great. All right, so why do we need this? In terms of, we know that survivors of intimate partner violence and the economic impact that experiencing gender-based violence has on people is really well documented. And so as an economy, we lose over 8 million days of paid work each year. We lose billions of dollars for this. But I want us to think about the long-term economic impacts of losing a job on survivors. And so many of us on this call are advocates, and in our advocacy space, we're certainly very familiar with the immediate impact. We know that, losing a job can be devastating. We know that even losing a few hours in a paycheck can mean the difference between making rent and having access to food. And so this is why a lot of our programs are structured the way we are, in terms of we have rental assistance, we have food pantries, and we provide resources to survivors.
Lydia, excuse me, this is the interpreter. Can you slow down a little bit, please?
Of course, thank you. But I want us to think about the long-term economic impact that the loss of work has for survivors. And so we know that the less wages that women earn over time can impact our retirement. We know that they can impact our ability to take care of ourselves later in life, but it really has a trickle effect through every piece of our economic well-being. And so many times a survivor will lose a job once they've disclosed domestic violence to their employer. And that's somewhere between up to 60% of the time that someone has disclosed domestic violence or been a victim of domestic violence at their workplace can lose a job within the next year of being employed. And so we know that gender-based violence can take people out of the workforce and well beyond workplace safety issues and well beyond impacts to their ability to make rent and things like that. It has this long-term thread through it. And so as we think of survivors, we think about the dignity of work and their ability to work and take care of themselves. Survivors have long told us that they feel like they lost everything, right? That things were taken away from them. They certainly lost their choices. They're experiencing that victimization. And so to lose work on top of this is just one more loss of dignity for a lot of folks. And so we want to make sure that they have the ability to stay attached to the workforce if that is safe for them to do so. And so paid leave programs can certainly help people stay in jobs that they like, stay in jobs that give them support, and keeping them attached to the workforce can really help them in the long term. Next slide, please. Okay. So, and this is, I can't see your slides now, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Maybe this problem's on my part with Zoom, but I have existing work supports. Okay, great. So I've got my little slide deck over here. We'll just do it this way. I'm not sure why. Zoom is weird. Okay, so already in Colorado, we have a few protections for survivors. And so many of you have working as advocates may be familiar with these leave laws. And so we have a really kind of an older law on the books. We have an existing 3-day leave law that is job protected leave for up to 3 days for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. This was passed in the early 2000s, I believe, but it is really limited to employers that already have access to the FMLA. And so we're talking about employers of 50 or more. We're talking about employees who live within 50 miles of their workplace. And so all these caveats of this. And while this is job protected leave, this can be paid or unpaid leave, and not a lot of many people know about this. I'll never forget, sitting in a courtroom next to a survivor who had been summoned to come into court to give information about bond and protection orders. And she worked for a large restaurant chain. Her employer was blowing up her phone saying, if you're not here, you're late, you've lost your job. And she is providing court documentation, she's sending pictures, she's begging with her employer not to fire her because she had to go to court that day to protect herself and her family. And that's not a unique circumstance by any means. I think if we talk to each other, we probably have all had similar experiences. And so, using something like a 3-day leave law, which we were able to, with her permission, write a letter to her employer and saying, hey, this law exists, you really shouldn't fire her, is helpful. But not a lot of people know about this or use it, although it is still on the books if you ever actually need it. And it's in Title 24 for all of you super geeks out there. We also have paid sick days in Colorado, and the paid sick days include safe leave. And so this is an earned piece of time. And so you accrue this as you go, and this is up to 40 hours a year. So you can earn that, you can use that for safe leave and those accommodations, and we have that available in Colorado. We also have unemployment insurance in Colorado, and actually 37 different states have provisions within their unemployment insurance policies that allow for survivors of gender-based violence to access unemployment benefits. And so worst case scenario, we have this available as well if there is a job loss. And in 2020, the unemployment insurance changed a little bit, and they used to have a long list of these are the appropriate documents that somebody can access if they are going to, use UI because of a job loss due to gender-based violence. And the department quickly realized that people simply didn't have access to police reports and protection orders and all of these documents that we're used to working with. And so they eliminated that. And they went to a self-attestation model, meaning that someone can sign an affidavit saying, this is happening to me, and I've lost my job, and I need to access my unemployment insurance benefit because of this. And so really great program. Unemployment insurance pays a little bit more than a lot of our state paid family medical leave programs. And so it's a higher benefit for a longer amount of time, and that had self-attestation in it, which will be important for our conversation moving forward. But unemployment insurance means that you have to be able to accept work. And so when you're on UI, you have to be able to say, I am physically, mentally, and able to accept jobs as they come to me. And so while that is a support that we want people to be aware of as we work with survivors that might be facing job loss, it is not a full stopgap. And of course, it is only a percentage of their wages. And next slide, please. So what is paid leave? And so when we think of the FMLA, we think of, time away from work. We think of things that, are so catastrophic that we actually cannot go to work, right? And so it is a broken leg when we have a physical job. It is a car accident, it is cancer, these big catastrophic things that happen to us. And so many of you indicated that you've heard of Colorado's paid leave program, FAMLI, which is fantastic. And so just to level set a little bit, FAMLI is not abnormal. We're actually one of 13 states and DC that have paid leave programs across the country. And these programs are spreading every year. More and more states pass laws that provide workers with time away from work when they have serious health conditions. And so while this might feel new, it's important to keep in mind that Rhode Island and New Jersey have actually had temporary disability programs for workers since the end of the Second World War. And so since the 40s, they have had TDI programs, or temporary disability insurance programs, for their workers. And all of those programs have remained solvent. They've been paying benefits. And so workers in those states have had access to these protections. Colorado began a legislative process for paid leave over a decade ago. And then Colorado was the first state after 7 years in legislature of kind of churning and perfecting, but was the first state to pass this at the ballot. And so you might have remembered Proposition 118 a few years ago. I think it passed in 2020. And when that proposition passed, that gave the state paid leave through the family program. And so the first year of family was, collecting benefits or collecting premiums. And so many of you have maybe seen this on your paycheck or your pay stubs. You probably saw it on your box 14A of your W-2 this year if you're a W-2 earner. And so we've been collecting premiums, and then January 1, we started paying out benefits. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so the way our paid leave program in Colorado works is that both the employer and the employee both pay in 0.45 of the employee's wages into the benefits fund. And this provides workers with paid job protected leave for up to 12 weeks. And so birthing parents, though, if you are someone that is giving birth and you have a complication either with your pregnancy, or you had a cesarean delivery, or you had a complication afterwards, you are eligible for an additional 4 weeks under this program. So up to 16 weeks of paid leave within the year that you access your benefits. And so while this is a new program in Colorado, we've had it for about a full fiscal quarter. This program is now available to folks that are in Colorado. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the eligibility and a little bit more about this program. Next slide. Okay. So as I mentioned FMLA when we talked about like what does a leave look like, and there are a lot of similarities between the family program and the FMLA program, but there are a lot of really key differences for people to understand as well. And so the FMLA was a backbone as we wrote the rules for this program, but it was certainly the floor and not the ceiling. And so the FMLA has been around for almost 30 years now. And it's been well litigated, and so we kind of know how to make situations under the FMLA work for survivors. There's been a lot of really great case law for domestic violence and sexual assault survivors to be able to take leave under the FMLA, but they've been taking them under the term serious health condition and proving the serious health condition. As they do that, it is not nearly as expansive as what we have within our state. And so while the FMLA, has these loopholes, the family program is actually much more robust. And so as we work through this, the FMLA, you have to be in a work site that has 50 or more workers. You have to have been employed at that work site for 12 months. You have job protection under the FMLA, but you have to have core or base hours worked to access that. I think it's like 1,250 hours. The eligibility for leave is actually determined by employers under the FMLA. But on the family side, most workers in Colorado will have access to family. And so we don't ask for the size of your employer for family. It is most workers, and it is if you meet the definition of a covered individual, which we're going to go to when we go through eligibility, but it is a way for most people to access this in terms of even a workforce of 2 people should have access to family under the program. Family is a paid leave, so it provides partial wage replacement for when you're out. Family does not have automatic job protection, and most states' programs, the job protection is a separate piece of policy within them that's not a guaranteed piece of that. But family, you have job protection once you've been with the employer for 180 days. The determination is by the division, and it is used in conjunction with FMLA. And so your time away for your family leave can run concurrently with your FMLA process. Okay, and we're going to get into all of those details as we go, but we'll get into that, Caitlin, in terms of local governments, for sure. So what are the qualified reasons for family? And so it is your own serious health condition. So if you have a diagnosis of your own, if you have anything that takes you out of the workplace, that certainly qualifies for family. It is not necessarily like it's not sinus infections, it's not colds or flus. We have paid sick days for those. These are things that you would normally take leave for. And so these are those big catastrophic things, like I got into a car accident, or I had a cancer diagnosis, or I'm having a baby. And so all of those bigger pieces for leave can qualify under serious health condition. It is also your family member's serious health condition. It is bonding with a new family member, and bonding in our state law includes welcoming a kinship foster care placement or accepting a child into your home through foster care, and that is birth or adoption of a child. And so we were able to expand that out a little bit. And so again, there's places where we can mirror the FMLA, and then there's places where family is much more expansive. It's also military exigency. And so if I have a loved one that is getting ready to deploy and I need to spend time with them before they deploy, or I need to see an attorney and work out temporary custody for their children, or put their things in storage, all of those things can be qualified under military exigency leave. The military members covered under other federal leave through the military, but the family members that are supporting them are covered through the family leave, as well as they would be covered under FMLA, but then they're paid under family. And then finally and lovingly, we have safe leave in Colorado, and safe leave covers domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking under our leave. And we are only one of 5 states that have access to safe leave, very explicitly listed in the purposes for leave under the state leave laws. New Jersey passed a law 3 weeks before Colorado included this in our language, and then subsequent states have also followed. And so it is a newer piece of paid leave within the state statutes, but we're certainly glad to have it. And there's a lot of reasons why it's helpful to have this language in particular, in terms of while we said there were attorneys that have helped survivors use these serious health condition reasons for their own paid leave purposes under the FMLA, we also know that survivors have other really valid reasons for needing to miss work to address the impacts of their victimization. And so in our safe leave laws and in safe leave laws throughout the country, we really kind of put those explicit purposes into the law. And so it is making your home safe or relocating. It's attending court. It's, changing your kid's school. So all of those things are really important in the lives of survivors to help make them safe, but they're not a serious health condition. And so the safe leave is really important to call out and explicitly have available to us as we help survivors work through an incident. Okay, next slide. That should be how much? Okay, great. Thank you everybody for your patience with our tech. Okay, so paid leave is paid, and it is paid through the state fund. These are you're paid through the fund that you're paying into at the state level. Ours is a social insurance program. It is not a private insurance program for the most part. And so the money that you pay in through your paychecks goes into a fund, and then you draw from that fund when you are needing leave. And so your employer does not pay for your leave directly. And the money that you put in for your leave is not necessarily the same money that you get out. It's not an HSA, it's not a savings account, it's a larger fund. And so you might be eligible for more leave benefit than the actual dollar per dollar amount that you put into the program. And this is because we were able to ratchet this and create this program so that people that are the lower wage earners get more benefit in terms of they can get a higher level of wage replacement. And so if I'm a low wage earner and I go out on family leave, I may qualify for up to 90% of my weekly wage paid to me as a benefit. And this ratchets down. And so if I'm a higher wage earner, that can ratchet down all the way to 37% of my actual weekly benefit. And so higher wage earners typically have more access to savings. And this is really based off the lessons that we found in other states in terms of, California's had a paid leave program for about 20 years. And what we found was folks that needed the leave the most and the lowest wage earners, their wage replacement was not high enough for them to be able to take the leave. And so really trying to thoughtfully structure this in Colorado, we made sure that our lowest wage earners would have enough wage replacement to be able to survive for those 12 weeks that they were on leave. And so we gave them the highest level of wage replacement. Now, this number is capped at $1,100 a week right now. Our Colorado law pegs this to our state's average weekly wage. And so this number can go up if our average weekly wage goes up, which it tends to do over time. It usually goes up nearly every year. And this number is set by the director of the family division. And the first time that this number gets reviewed is actually January 1, 2025. And so every year they will take a look at the health of the fund and what is coming in for premiums. And then they'll say, how is this number in comparison to our weekly benefit? And can we look at raising this number? And so right now it's capped at about $1,100 a week. But I mean, think about the difference that means to people when they are needing time off of work, right? In terms of I can take time off and still have a decent sized part, at least a third of my paycheck coming into me as I'm taking time off to heal and to address what I need to do for myself and my family. And so it really can mean the difference between taking care of yourself and taking care of a loved one, or not being able to be there when you really need to do that. And so the benefits and the premiums have a calculator that lives on the family website. You can always go and check through that calculator what your approximate benefit would be. You know what your premiums are right now because you're seeing them in your paychecks. But if you're ever curious about your benefit, you can certainly check out that calculator, and that will give you more information about where you would be in the scale. Okay.
There's a
Go
few
ahead.
questions in the chat.
Yes.
We have one about, is maternity leave included in welcoming a new family member?
Absolutely. And so maternity leave is the thing that most people think about when they think of bonding leave. And so your bonding leave is caring for a new baby, and then it's also up to, that's also your healing time as well. And so we see this becoming different when we talk about private plans. And so the old private plans with the older short-term disability programs that some people may still have access to, it tended to say you get like 8 weeks for healing mama and you get like 4 weeks for bonding, right? And they made the 12 up under the old FMLA. But family doesn't really parse that out in the same way. It says you get 12 weeks for bonding. Now you are expected to heal in that time as well. But if you need time for healing, not for bonding, but if you had a medical complication, you can get up to 4 weeks of additional time and get to 16 weeks under family. And so that bonding is 12 weeks for having a baby, adopting a baby, welcoming a baby into foster care or kinship care.
Thank you, Lydia. And we have one other question. In reference to the chart on our screen, is this gross or net income on the chart?
Yeah, so that's going to be your that we get this question a lot in terms of how do we do gross and net. And so those are estimates on that for that chart. And so the division, though, when we talk about the premiums, have decided to, and the benefits are using gross. So the chart is just when you think of like percentages of what you're doing, but like when you look at like the actual numbers, you're going to use your gross figures for that. Okay, so types of leave. And I know we have a mix of folks on here. We have some folks that are maybe administrators or executive directors who are trying to figure out, how do I administer this? And then we have, certainly advocates that are trying to figure out, how do I help clients access this? And then, certainly we're all qualified for this benefit ourselves if we ever need it as well. So it's important to know that under paid leave and under the family program in Colorado, workers are not required to exhaust their existing paid time off before they can access the benefit, right? So now what we saw in FMLA was that a worker could use all of their PTO time while they're out on FMLA, and the FMLA was only the job protected leave, and your actual PTO is what was being drained if you ever had a paycheck coming in while you're on FMLA. Family recognizes that, well past those 12 weeks, newborns get sick a lot, don't go to daycare a lot, and you might have other needs for follow-up appointments and for all of these other things past that 12 weeks. And so you get to keep your banked paid time off past the time that you're out on leave. Now, what we typically see is that most people will use a continuous leave when they have a bonding need. But a lot of the times they'll also use different types of leave, like intermittent or reduced scheduled leave. And so a continuous leave is you start on one day, you go the full 12 weeks, you don't have to go back to work until that leave is done. When we have intermittent leave, maybe it's something like this, where I had a knee replacement, and I needed 3 weeks off to do aggressive PT and to recover from surgery. But now I need to go to physical therapy, and now I need to go to doctor's appointments afterwards. And so you can have a mix of time that you need away. And so it can be a longer period of continuous time, and then an additional time away from work, up to those 12 weeks. Reduced schedule leave is maybe I have an ongoing need. Maybe I know that I'm on dialysis, and I know that every Tuesday and Saturday I have to go to the clinic. And so I'm going to schedule my time, at these predictable times, and I'm going to need to not work 40 hours a week because I need to go take care of myself during those times. And so for up to 12 weeks, you have reduced schedule leave for those needs as well. And so when we think about working with survivors in this space, we know that sometimes there's an immediate period of crisis, and maybe that's when they need emergency shelter. Maybe that's when they need to just really kind of get away and figure out what their next move is. And then we also see survivors that need time away for extended periods of time. And this might be a court case. This might be, I need to, I've met with my landlord, I've taken time off to, find a new place to live, but now I need, 3 days off to actually make the move. And so there's a lot of different ways that each types of these leave can be really important for survivors to be able to access. And so it does not have to be continuous leave. And the job protection that you have in your family is strong enough to be able to use a family claim for safe leave and have the job protection for the time that you need it for this full 12 weeks. And you can spread that over the course of a year if you need to. So keeping that in mind, and we'll talk a little bit more about job protection and retaliation. Next slide, please. So
Lydia, we just have a question. Does the death of a family member qualify?
That is a fabulous question. And the answer is it depends. But only if you have a serious health condition related to that for yourself. And so bereavement leave is different from family. And bereavement leave is covered by a different law. I believe we got it in under the paid sick day law a couple years ago. So you have some time for bereavement, but it is not a 12-week leave, and it is not, a leave that you get simply for the death of the family member. Not to oversimplify that, but in terms of access to this program. So if your family member was terminally ill and you were able to file a family claim to go take care of that person before they passed, it's covered by family. If your doctor or your healthcare provider, and we have a really generous description of healthcare provider under this law. So if your person says, I want you to take, this is going to really impact your health. I want you to take time off for your mental health, for your physical health right now, and they are willing to provide that documentation, then yes, but that would come under your own serious health conditions. So the health conditions, unfortunately, not to be crass, but apply to living individuals. Does that answer the question? Great.
I think so, yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay. So let's talk about eligibility. And for family, for eligibility, this is one of the broadest eligibilities that we have for any state benefit program in Colorado. And so if you are localized to Colorado through your work, and family uses the Department of Labor standardization for localization, which really becomes important when you're talking about folks that live near state lines or work remotely, and say you live in Fort Collins, but you work in Wyoming a lot, any of those things. But typically you're going to be localized to work in Colorado for most of the scenarios. And you've earned $2,500 across the last 5 calendar quarters. That's not a lot of money when you talk. I mean, that's kind of a livable wage. It's actually way less than a livable wage, but you have up to 5 fiscal quarters to make that amount of money. And so this includes gig workers, it includes agricultural workers, it includes workers that are on an ITIN. If you are self-employed, you can opt into the program, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then also included in the opt-in are local government workers. And so I believe there was a question around local governments and schools that have opted out of the program, and that was in the ballot language. And so we knew that this is largely due to the laws that we have around local control in Colorado and unfunded mandates for local governments in Colorado. And so there's an option for them to opt in personally, even if their school district or their local government opts out. And so if you have you work for a township and they opt out and say, we can't afford premiums right now, you as an individual worker can opt into the program when you need it. And so they have that ability, so your individual school teachers and everyone can come into the program. We do have several municipalities and towns that said, this is a great program for our workers, and we can't match this level of wage replacement any other way. And so we do have some that are opt-in and some that have opt-out. And so most employers do provide some type of coverage. And so most employers down to a shop of 2 people are required to provide family coverage, and they can do that under a state plan, which is the family program, or under a private plan. And so the private plans are a little bit more limited sometimes in terms of who we see have access to those programs. Those are typically larger employers, but the private plan has to match the state program in terms of all of their benefits. They can't charge a worker more for a private plan, and they can't have less benefits attached to that plan. But we have several private plans that are operating usually in larger employers. Okay, next slide. We have a great definition of family member in Colorado, and this is given to us in both our ballot and our rule. This is a significant personal bond that is like a family relationship. And so regardless of biological or legal relationship, and this is really important to know and understand because it's a little bit expansive than what we have under the FMLA. And so it's expanded, but it's also normalized in federal law, because this follows what the Office of Personnel Management and the federal law has been doing for the last 13 or so years. And so it's not blown up the world. Most people are not taking this for casual relationships. These are really relationships that are like a family relationship. And so I think if we think through what those relationships might be to us, we can all identify someone in our lives who is like family that we would take a leave for. And so, my sister had been partnered with somebody as a paramedic for several years. And when that person came down with a cancer diagnosis, she took time away to be able to take care of her and make sure that she got the treatment, right? So there's those people that you would just do anything for, and those people that have a close professional relationship with. And the department has created some rules on this in terms of, you know, proving or evidence of a close relationship, but they're pretty broad. And it's, you know, have you lived together in the past? Are there pieces of financial responsibility? Does this person have support anywhere else? And so most relationships, if you feel like it's a familial relationship, and this is someone that is known to you in that way, was likely to qualify under this. And so when we talk about like family of choice and family of origin, especially for a lot of our underserved populations, this is really important to have in place. Okay. Next slide. Job protection starts 180 days on the job. They do not have to be consecutive 180 days on the job. So if you start working somewhere and you take a break, maybe you are a seasonal worker, and you come back and you take a break for 2 weeks, or you take a vacation, anything like that, and you come back and you finish the 180 days on the job, you are then qualified for family. And so you don't have to sit there and like count hours or days. It is 180 days cumulative across the year. And so job protection, again, not really important for survivors in terms of having access to this. We know that we see a lot of employers that you disclose domestic violence. Maybe they're really empathetic and sympathetic for, a while, like maybe 6 months, and then they get to a point where, this is dragging on too long. They start, finding other reasons to attack your performance, that sort of thing. The job protection and family is really helpful for survivors because, again, it will extend in that year that you have the leave because of the strong retaliation rules. And so I encourage anyone, if you are working with a client and they are facing this, to take a look at those rules, and those are all linked to the slide. Okay. The family division is currently interpreted. So if you go to the next slide, and we talk about leave from work. Here's what family has on safe leave, right? And so we talk about, leave for these purposes under safe leave. Other purposes that you might have for safe leave are likely to fall under that serious health condition. And so between serious health condition and these reasons, you've got a pretty good base for applying for safe leave. In this language under safe leave and in the retaliation language, you have this phrase that says leave from work. Now, leave from work is currently being interpreted by the department as meaning if you are not currently attached to your job at the time you take leave, you are not eligible for family leave. And that is despite laws that have provided portability for the program in terms of your attachment to work and your benefit from work is not based off of your immediate workplace and your immediate premium for that first quarter or so at your workplace. It looks back, again, those 5 quarters. But right now, the current interpretation is that you have to have a job to be taking leave from. Now, the way they're doing this right now is that you have to be employed the day your leave starts. Okay, so if something happens, the week after you start taking leave and you can't go back to work, or you lose your job for whatever reason, at that point, you're still eligible for family. You've paid in for the benefit. You're on a leave claim. That's going to stay, and you'll work that out, and through the period of this. But you have to be employed that first day that you are eligible for benefits because of this language and safe leave and in the retaliation claims. Next slide, please. Just this. And so again, the time you start leave, you have to be employed to get the family benefits. And again, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of work between unemployment insurance, which we talked about, and family insurance. And so unemployment is, I have to be able to accept work. Family is, my world is falling apart. I cannot work right now, right? I'm too sick to work. My kid is too sick for me to work. So family covers those times when you're not able to work. And then we think of UI as the other side of that coin, meaning I'm able to work, I just don't have a job or access to employment at this point. Okay. And we'll pause there for some questions.
Lydia, this is Sierra. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but invite you all to continue to ask questions, or if you want to unmute yourselves and share out loud, you're more than welcome to do so. But I don't see anything in the chat right now.
Awesome. Okay. So next slide then. And so we'll just keep going, put your questions in. We're going to have some time here. We're getting through family, and then we're going to talk really explicitly about safely. Okay. So for people that are self-employed, again, you are eligible to opt into the program. And the great thing about self-employment and for local government workers, and so again, if you are a local government worker and your municipality or your local government has opted out of the program, you can opt in yourself and you opt in very similarly and really the same process as you would if you were self-employed. And so for our self-employed workers, you do not have to opt in until you need the program. And let me say that again. Explain it. So normally everybody goes through their working lives in Colorado and you're paying in premiums for the program and it's there when you need to take a leave. If you are self-employed or you're a local government worker and you're like, I'm not paying premiums right now, I don't think I'm going to need to leave, and that's okay. And then something catastrophic happens, right? Like your kid gets into a car accident, your kid gets, something happens to you or a family member. You can opt into the program, provide tax documentation of what your earnings are and how much you've made, and they will calculate a benefit for you, and you will be able to access the program as a self-employed worker or as a local government worker. Now, the way that is recouped is you have to promise to stay into the program for 3 years into the future. Okay, so then you would start paying in premiums once your leave was done. You would start paying premiums in based off, again, the tax documentation that you gave the department. They would say, here's where we're going to calculate your benefit at, here's where we're going to calculate your premium, and you're going to be able to access a claim when you need assistance, and then you're going to have to stay in and repay the premiums. Again, you're not repaying necessarily what you got out of it, but you're paying the premium based off of your wages. Okay, so really important to keep that in mind. And then for people that this is also, a pretty expensive program. And so again, like this is for you, if you have people that are, working in a care economy that are, working on wages or working, on wages that are maybe, not on a W-2. Unfortunately, you do have to have some sort of tax record to be able to do it this way. And so it's an important reminder. So the leave is available as long as you have the tax documentation to provide. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've talked a lot about family. We've talked a little bit about how this might be helpful to survivors. We've talked a little bit about why safe leave is good. We've talked about, how, economic abuse happens to survivors when they experience victimization. And so how do we think this program can be beneficial to the survivors that we work with? You can put them in the chat, or you're welcome to come off mute.
I'm a off mute kind of girl. I would say it just allows more choice, which I think when we're supporting folks, that's what we want to give them, options and choice for them to make the best decisions for their journey.
Absolutely. And if we say to someone, and especially this group, right, community-based advocates and government folks and maybe folks that work on medical and legal advocacy, when we say, one way to access justice, however you define that for yourself, is to come to court. But if you say it's coming to court and looking for justice or losing your job, is that really a choice? Right? It's not for a lot of people. And so this gives choice back. to people, and it gives choice back to them in terms of, I don't have to choose to leave my workplace. If it is safe for me to stay there and I like my job and that's a supportive environment for me, I don't have to choose to leave that right now. And it really makes choices for people real choices instead of these false choices, right? But it gives them time to recover and to heal. And if we go to the next slide,
I just wanted to share, Lydia, in the
Yeah.
chat, we have some responses. So just sharing that it could be a big help. Sometimes even just a week would be critical. Taking off time to heal physically or go to therapy. Then we did have a question around what kind of evidence needs to be provided.
Oh yeah, I got a whole slide on that. You're gonna be so excited for that answer. But also, I think I just want to point out too. A lot of us are working in programs that provide shelter, and especially emergency shelter for people. And I've worked in shelters for decades, and a lot of times people get stuck because they don't have enough money to leave shelter, to come up with down payments, to move and relocate. And so if you have your paycheck coming in, or you have family benefits coming in, this can reduce your time in shelter, because nobody wants to live there. It's communal living. It's crazy. So like, you want to be able to really have the choice of, I need to access safety and I want to be able to move on with my life. And so I think this can be really beneficial for survivors. And so while it is not something that I would bring up in like a crisis situation, if you're doing medical and legal advocacy in an ER, when you talk about options with survivors, you can talk to them about accessing the safe leave so that they have time. And you can talk to them about structuring this as intermittent leave or a reduced scheduled leave for when they need it. Obviously, if you're in the ER of somebody, you're probably in a continuous leave situation where you might need a few days to heal and take off. But again, a lot of that is covered by your paid sick time. And so we're talking about like leave, like I had to have surgery or I'm going to need an extended recovery time. But you don't have to have a medical condition or a serious health condition to access safe leave in Colorado, because the way that it is structured, because we gave you those very specific reasons to use it. And so you get to uncouple those, and survivors get to use it when they need it, which is really important and really great. Okay, next slide.
Lydia, I advanced to the how could this be beneficial for survivors. You want me to go to the next one?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. And again, thanks for your patience with that. All right. So you should be seeing claims from the department. Okay, awesome. So Colorado has been paying benefits since January 1, 2025. So January of this year. And so we still have folks that are, that started leaves, that are just now coming off of leave, and that are accessing the program from that very initial start. And so this is a snapshot of where we were as of April 3rd. So this data is a couple weeks old now, but take a look at the safe leave number, right? And so we've got a lot of folks that are using over 840 people have accessed safe leave since January, which just makes my heart so happy. And I have a feeling that several of you on the call have helped make this possible. And so thank you for that. So 840 people have accessed safe leave so far. And it looks like they're using it continuously with a little bit of intermittent and a little bit of reduced leave in there, but these are all good things. And so we want to make sure that you all know and see that this is real, this is happening, and this is available to folks that you serve. And so I also think that, safe leave might have elements of this own serious health condition in there. And so it depends on how the application is put in. If it came in through a healthcare provider, it's going to be serious health condition. But again, survivors get to go for their own safe leave. And so if you go to the next slide, who approves the leave and how do I have to document my situation? This is the magic of Colorado. And this is the part that we really want to make sure we do a good job of and we protect. And so a survivor gets to say, I want leave at this time. It is not her employer. The employer does not have to give permission for the survivor to go out on leave or anyone to access leave. And the documentation, remember how we talked about UI had said, here's a list of things that you need to give us to prove that you're in the situation. And UI said, this isn't really working for us. And we were able to copy that through the Safe Leave program in Colorado. And so survivors in Colorado have self-attestation to access safe leave. So what does that mean? Next slide. So self-attestation is you go onto the family website and you find safe leave, and there'll be an affidavit there. And the affidavit says, I'm experiencing the following. And those are all the reasons that we talked about in terms of the safe leave, right? And so it is making your home safe. It is, kids' school, all those things. And so you say, this is happening to me. I need safe leave. And self-attestation is the gold standard for this in terms of we know that you know how hard it is to get a copy of a police report. You know that doesn't happen overnight sometimes. You know that even your protection order, unless you are there in court waiting for it and have someone actually get that for you, is sometimes hard to get a copy of. And so all of these things have been barriers, and this program through self-attestation was able to eliminate a lot of those barriers. And so we're really thankful for that. Now, the department is the one to approve the leave. And so let's talk about what your employer knows. So we're going to spend a lot of our time the next couple of slides talking about confidentiality, which I know all of you are very familiar with, or most of you are very familiar with if you're a community-based advocate. And so the department is the one that sees this information. And again, they're seeing the attestation form. They don't need to know the details of what happened. The departments can say, and any program like this, especially post-pandemic, has to guard against fraud and abuse. And so if a claim comes in and something triggers that it's weird or suspicious, they can ask for more information. And that more information doesn't have to be a big, long soliloquy, or it's not documentation. It can be a letter from an advocate. It can be something similar to what many of you may be familiar with if you've ever had to provide documentation for the address confidentiality program. And I see Kim is with us today. And so, that letter is very much like, I am an advocate. This person has a need. Go for it. And so it is not on January 8th, this happened to me, right? And so it can, if we get to the point where we have to provide documentation, that's the part of the fail safe, right? Most survivors will have something. They'll have a witness, they'll have access to an advocate, they'll have some sort of documentation. They can provide whatever they feel like is helpful in that to the department should they get a question for that. But the fact that the department is approving claims that high makes me think that we got this right, and that it is going fairly well for the safe leave. Your employer for any type of leave is really only told that you need leave, and here's the date you're going to be out. Here's the date that you're expected to return to work. The employer does not necessarily need to know why you are on leave. The department does not tell them this is a safe leave versus a serious health condition versus military exigency. And so it's important that the survivor be the one to control the narrative around why they are leaving and why they need a leave claim. And so we find that most of the time, employers know. I mean, obviously, if you are pregnant, they're going to figure out you're on maternity leave. If you have shared with them any information, they can assume other things. But the department does not say, hey, this person's going out because they got a diagnosis they need to deal with. It is, here's the date that you're leaving, here's the date that you're coming back. The employer is notified within 5 days of someone filing a leave claim that this person has a need for leave, and the employer can say, well, wait, this person doesn't work for me, or they don't work for me anymore. And so they can do some back and forth with the department, and that's really, to keep everyone, talking and making sure that it's not a fraud case that we're dealing with. And so there are some fail safes in there. There are some things that the employer will be able to know. If you have a physical job, like say you operate heavy machinery, your employer can ask you to provide through your healthcare provider, information that you are fit to return to work. And that's also in the FMLA. And we really needed to mirror that for Colorado, really because we had a lot of professions that require people to be able to physically participate in the workforce. So while that is in there, most of the time your employer really just knows the very basics of what they need to know. Designated representatives. And so say you have someone that needs leave, but they can't file for it themselves. And so maybe there's an accident so severe, person is in surgery, the last thing they can do is sit down at a computer and apply for this. Or if your child is sick and it's a minor child, or if it's your grandparent, any of those scenarios you can all imagine, there's a way that you can help someone access leave, and you can be made their designated representative, and then you can be the person that files the paperwork for them and on their behalf. So this is one of the circumstances where you can file for a leave claim after the incident has happened or after the date that you need to start leave occurs. And that's really those catastrophic incidences in terms of, well, I couldn't get to the computer the day I fell down a flight of stairs and had a concussion and broke my leg. So my spouse helped me apply for leave. And I need the leave to start, that night because I missed my first shift, but I'm just not getting around to the paperwork. And so if we go to the next slide, we have confidentiality, but I will say it's for designated representatives. We did create a mechanism in terms of for really specifically for safe leave, that the person that caused the harm cannot be the designated representative. And so the person accused of shoving you down the stairs cannot then be the person that collects your benefits, right? So again, this was in our fraud and abuse pieces for this. And so you can't cause the harm and then get the check sent to you. And so just a fail safe in there to be aware of.
Lydia, before we hop into the confidentiality piece, we have a question. Would a protection order be sufficient evidence? And what if the employer already fired the victim?
So all great questions. And so yes, protection orders, absolutely sufficient. Again, if you get to the point where you're needing a protection order, I mean, some things already kind of gone awry because you should be able to get a self-attestation, but protection orders are always a good standard of, hey, this is happening, right? If you have already been fired, you're probably looking at an unemployment insurance claim versus a family claim, which is why we say, you can file for family leave through safe leave, really like when you need it, right? So portability should have been there, but it's not quite there with the department in terms of what you're being paid on is being paid through those 5 look back quarters, and you've already paid into it and all of these things. But the language the department is currently using is that leave from work. So as long as you are attached to work the day you apply for your leave, that first day that you start leave, then the job protection should be there. Does that make sense? Great.
Thanks, Lydia. I'm going to go to the next slide.
Thank you. And confidentiality. Perfect. So the department has some level of confidentiality. We get this question all the time in terms of, can my abuser subpoena my records from the department? The answer is anyone can subpoena anything. The department is going to try to say no because they have confidentiality. They do not have the express permission to quash subpoenas. They do not really have privilege other than just the regular kind of governmental worker privilege. And so I just wanted to say, like, it is maybe possible that they couldn't quash on this the way the current laws are written. But they will certainly not just hand over records to anybody, and they would fight for that. I also want to just help explain why that's a fool's errand in terms of the information that you get from the division is going to be, need for a leave claim. You're using self-attestation. There's really good language on the back end of family that we wrote in terms of, if you are a survivor and you go to court and, maybe it didn't turn out great. Maybe the court said, it was not guilty. The abuser or the accused person cannot come back and say, the court didn't think I was guilty. You claimed benefits. You're a fraudster. You owe money back to the department. There's none of that in family. There's actually express prohibitions against that in terms of, unless a court has a conviction of a false accusation, so an actual conviction, not just someone talking about it. The department could at that point look at it, but realistically, there's also language around like what is in good faith for the department to do so. And so it's really a safe place to do and collect those benefits in terms of no one's going to come back and say, this didn't really happen to you once you provide that documentation, once you start a safe leave claim. The other pieces of this, and again, there are protections in the back end for fraud and abuse for the overall department and fund, but for survivors, I feel like they should feel confident in being able to apply for the program and not feel like, but so-and-so is out there saying this never happened. It doesn't matter. At that point, they can still access the benefit. And so we don't want people to get tripped up in a lot of the back and forth. The claim and the leave is there when they need the leave of the claim. Okay. All right, so next slide. So obviously, an advocate can be a designated representative. If you are the person that is working with a survivor and there's not a family member that's available, you can sign up to be a designated representative and get that, and as designated representative, information would come to you. But again, if the survivor is safe to receive mail, if they're stable enough, things can come to them, and that is confidential. For community-based advocates, obviously you are covered under state confidentiality, federal confidentiality, all those things. You might need your internal releases to be able to talk to the department and to give them this information, but that information is going to stay with that safe leave claim. Safe leave claims are actually handled by folks in the department that have some additional training, or they should be, or they will be soon. And so these are not things that, are going to leak out. Like there is confidentiality within the department, and folks should be able to feel good about sharing that information as needed with the department. But again, remember, it's very limited information that the department gets in the first place. And so we really want people to understand that even though, there's a small chance that they can't quash the subpoena, likely they're going to be able to. Likely it's going to be, safe with them unless they have a major data leak. It's safe information. It's going to be really difficult for someone to use the ability for a survivor to access safe leave against that survivor, is the bottom line. And so I want people to feel comfortable and confident about that. Okay.
Lydia, does Safe Leave have resource materials for survivors?
That is a great question. And so I left the department after we wrote the rules. And in terms of how it's been implemented since January, I don't know the answer to that. I'm certainly happy to ask and come back to you. We talked about that in terms of, if you filed a safe leave claim, did you get an email from the department with, other information, like, the hotline and advocacy information and that piece of it. I'm not sure if that is in play yet, but we can certainly find out. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So, as you saw, as you might remember from that big data slide with all the numbers, most people are accessing family on their own. Meaning they don't have to go through the call center. If you're trying to access family benefits and you're like, I can't figure this out, or, my tech isn't working, whatever, there's a call center that you can call and somebody can help walk you through that. But most people are able to access this on their own through the online portal, which is great. And so this division did a lot of work on user design and making sure that things were easy to apply for and easy to walk through. And I think the numbers are bearing that out when we have most people being able to access it online through the portal and not needing help through the call center. So you can go to FAMLI. The actual portal is My Family Plus. Through Colorado, you can log in, you can set with an advocate, you can set with a survivor as they log in and support them through that process and help them submit an application. It does take, I've heard it takes about 20 minutes to get through the first part of it. There is a section that will ask to verify their identity. They're using ID.me, which if you've ever had to apply for any other government benefits, credit checks, a lot of people use ID.me, a lot of government uses ID.me. And so this is typically the one that pops up and says, have you ever lived at these addresses? And like 5 of them are wrong, and like one of them is right type of thing. But it's a way for us to verify, for the department to verify that you are the actual person applying for the leave. And so again, just any government program, there's got to be guardrails against fraud and abuse. And so there's the ID.me piece of it. You verify the application. You can put your application in, and then you can track your application status. The approvals are pretty quick. You're supposed to get paid within 2 weeks of having your claim approved. That is the ceiling for that. That is not the floor. And so if they can get you paid quicker, they certainly will. When we talk about when someone gets paid, you get the first time you're eligible for paid is when you've missed 8 hours of work. And so if you started your claim as reduced schedule and it's like 1 hour a week, you wouldn't be able to be paid until you hit that 8-hour mark, because paying people for quarter hours and hours of work versus a full day is a nightmare. So there is that limitation, but you should be able to get that when you need it. So as you're working with somebody, and maybe they're planning to leave, maybe if you are working with a survivor that is lucky enough to be able to say, here's what I'm going to go, and actually plan that leave, you can help them apply for benefits. And then you can get that in the system. You don't have to actually take the benefit until that first day you missed work, right? And so you can get the information and start your application, and then go back and file it and use it the first day you miss work. This is really helpful for pregnancy and birthing, right? So when you get to the hospital, you don't have to sit down and find a computer. You just click in and say, yep, we have the baby. And the department says, Mazel tov, here's your check. So you can apply ahead of time. I believe it's 30 days ahead of time. And then track your application when it starts. So just hot tips. Okay. All right. And so, I know you guys are at questions. This is typically a really chatty group of advocates, and so we're super excited. So I welcome you to come off mute, raise your hands, and questions that you have. But then also, we'd love to hear about how you think you're going to be able to use this in your advocacy practice as well, in terms of, does this give you the information you need to be able to help someone apply for leave?
Lydia, this is Sierra. While people think of additional questions or response to the question we have on the screen, we did have one in the chat earlier. Is there a one-pager people using Safe Leave can send to employers for their rights and protection from retaliation?
So that's a great question. I would think of it this way. And so the answer is, the department does not have one specifically on Safe Leave. for that. And it might be something that advocates or the ASER coalition to work out as an advocate piece. The job protection, though, those are listed on all the employment posters. And so if you find your latest employment poster hanging up at your work site, if you have a physical work site, you'll see retaliation for filing a family claim on there. And one of the arguments that I used to say all the time when this was in the legislature is that we don't want to separate family leave so far from other types of leave that it becomes an other, or it becomes somehow less than other types of leave, right? We don't want to diminish it. And so when somebody goes out on maternity leave, your employer or someone doesn't come back and say, okay, so I'm going to give you time to learn how to breastfeed, but I'm not going to give you time to build the crib or go to or drive to your appointment or any of those other things. So we didn't want to parse this out and have particular pieces for safe leave or for bonding leave or for your own health consequence or your family's health consequence. We just said job protection and retaliation across the board. So does that make sense in terms of, like, if we want to normalize people's ability to use it, we don't want to say, here's the other.
I'm not seeing any other responses in the chat or questions, but again, feel free to put those in the chat or unmute yourselves. So the questions are, how will you use what you learned here today in your advocacy practice? And do you have additional questions?
Awesome. Yay. Yes. Get people connected to family for sure. And it is good stuff. It is there. The numbers for the first quarter were likely pretty inflated in terms of, we started in December, allowing people to file for claims ahead of time. And we know that we had people wait for things that they could wait for, until this benefit kicked off in January. And so I think we had probably larger January numbers than we might have in subsequent years for this program. But even with that, the fund is healthy. These are claim numbers that were anticipated by the department. They're in line with what we saw with other states as they launched programs. And so, this fund is something that, people will be able to count on for years to come, which is fantastic. And so it's a game changer for a lot of our Colorado families. And it's really a game changer for survivors' economic security. So we really appreciate the time that you're taking today to learn about this program and to think through some of these questions. We go to our next slide, and so certainly keep those questions coming. We have a little bit more time left. So I'll tell you about what else is happening around this in the ether, which is really exciting. And so are you on the next slide, Sierra? The Federal SAFE Act. Perfect. All right, so okay. Maybe you've heard it called VESA. Maybe you've heard rumblings about it in terms of there's got to be something at the federal level for survivors and to take paid leave at the federal level. Nothing has passed yet, but again, so we have the FMLA for serious health conditions in our 5 states. We've got the safe leave, but that leaves a lot of people across the country without specific protections. And so Congresswoman Debbie Dingell out of Michigan has promised to reintroduce a Safe Leave Act in this Congress, and so the 118th Congress, which we all know is likely not going to pass this particular iteration of Congress. If you've been watching anything in the federal news, they are not passing legislation at the same rate that any other Congress has in the history of our country. But she's going to introduce it in this Congress. And I just want you to know that there is a group of people from a lot of our national technical assistance providers, and Center for American Progress, and all of these really smart groups that work on paid safe leave and work on domestic violence, working to create model legislation and a regulatory language framework for states as they pass safe leave. And we're working on the actual language of the SAFE Act before introduction. So this is happening. I think for us in Colorado, it's to help be good stewards of the fund, to help people access safe leave, and to collect stories of how and why that works, right? And to share that with other states and say, here's model legislation that if you have an existing paid leave program, you can adopt. You can run a bill and adopt this and use this as a qualifying reason for leave within your existing program. And as other states come on board with paid family medical leave programs, to include that in their language at the outset. And then as we work towards a federal program. And so a federal program was proposed in Build Back Better. Did not make it anywhere, but as that keeps coming up, we will see safe leave in that program because of the work that we're doing right now with Congress and with leadership. And so that work is continuing and ongoing. So just give you some hope for the field, and then know that collecting stories of survivors using this program and being able to have it support them economically and have it support them throughout their journeys is really impactful and helpful. And so please share those stories with one another, share that with your coalitions, because the coalitions are going to be the ones that are called on to get those stories out. And as other states fight for this, they are really looking towards the experiences of other states to say this is a good thing to do. And so it's really always helpful to make sure that those stories get shared somewhere and shared in a way that can be used in the policy space. And then finally, while Colorado has these amazing programs, again, 1 in 5, awesome, way to go, awesome work, Colorado. And we have safe leave, and we had safe leave and paid sick days, and we have safe leave in our family program, and we have really good access in our unemployment insurance for survivors. There's more that we can do at the state level around retaliation and helping people stay connected to the job place through protections for DV and SA survivors. And so there's some great model language out there. I encourage people to look at that, and again, talk to other states around how those things are working. Conversation for another time. So I say this to know that while family is great and paid safe days are great, we know that it's not a panacea, that there's a little bit more work to do in this space, and I'll count on all of you to get that done. Okay. Any final thoughts or questions?
Lydia, this is Sierra. Just if you have a chance, take a look in the chat. Everyone's just thanking you for your expertise and just the connection points here. So just take a look in there, and thank you all so much for joining us. There is a survey link that was shared in the chat by Kathy. So if you all will just take a second before you log off to fill that out, it helps us and Lydia in just determining what other information you'd like to know, what other questions you have, and helping us plan for the future. So please, please, please continue to ask questions in the chat if you'd like. Lydia, if you want to share your contact information, feel free to do so. We'll share that in a follow-up email with copies of the slides, your contact information as well. And so thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And thank you so much, Lydia, for sharing all of this very helpful, informative information. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. And Sierra, so when I lost, the whole bar at the bottom, including the chat, is gone off my screen. So if you could paste those,
share that with you.
Yeah, if you could share those with me, that'd be great. I'm so sorry.
People are just sharing. Thank you so much. Great job. Very informative.
Great.
What'll make a difference for many in the future. Very helpful. Thank you for the calls to action. So just a lot of great praises in the chat. Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, feel free to hop in there and do that survey. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And so, Sierra, because we was on a grant to do this, if there's like the response to the question, like, did you learn something? Like, so that the number of people that have participated, and then the if there, you know, if we, I don't think we have to formally ask the question of like, had they heard of family before? So we had like, I think 3 people say yes, and then,
yeah, we can gather what's in the chat, and Kathy can send you a follow-up email with all that information. And
Great.
Thank you so much, Lydia.
Great.
I know there's still some people on, but does anyone have any specific questions for Lydia? You can unmute if you do.
Lydia, I could send you I did a closed captioning transcript as well, so I could send you that.
Please.
And I know that question you asked, people raised their hand, so I don't know how we can capture that other than in the recording. And I'll also send you copies of the chat itself, so that might be able to help.
Great.
But thank you. This was wonderful. Obviously, people were very interested.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry the Zoom was a little funky. I don't know what.
Well, and I kept making you the host and unmaking you the host and trying to figure out.
I know. Nothing changed on my screen. Like, it's still just blank at the bottom. I have no
as
idea.
much as we test, things happen, but you know, we keep moving through. But I mean, you gave a lot of great information, and people will get the slides in the follow-up emails. So if they miss anything, they'll have it. So yeah, we'll send you that follow-up email, Lydia. Enjoy the rest of your day. And everyone else who's on the line, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting, but you can always reach out to us or Lydia if you have any questions. Thank you to our interpreters, Julie and Leslie.
Yeah, thank you
have a
so
great
much.
rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So I close this because I can't see the toolbar. All right, bye.
Bye.
Really, Michelle? Really? Oh, no, here we go.